Hi, Marbs here. You know, the Atari 7800 is an interesting console, and I've only recently begun exploring it. I gotta be real with you, and I had to think about this for a while. I spent a lot of time during this time period playing NES. So when the 7800 came out, I guess I really wasn't very interested in it. Now, the 7800, interestingly enough, got its name because when you add 2600 and 5200 together, obviously you get the model 7800, which is supposed to be better and more powerful than the previous two generations. The interesting thing is this was actually designed 2 years prior to the introduction of the NES, and because of all the drama and upheaval at Atari, it didn't get released until way later. Now, I gotta say, that caused some of the games to probably not age very well. But the concept of having these new games that could be more powerful using the same pin configuration and having full 2600 backwards compatibility was very attractive to Atari, and Atari thought it'd be very attractive to consumers. The only problem is that the technology and the look just isn't as good as the NES games, I would say, for the most part. Not to mention you had competitors such as TurboGrafx and Genesis just about to come into the market, and that wasn't really good for Atari. So eventually they abandoned the 7800 and moved to the Jaguar. Now, that's a story for another day. But there are some very interesting and unique things about the 7800 that I found. One of them is it was one of the first consoles, if not the first console, to use encryption to prevent locking out games that weren't authorized for use on the console. This was Atari's attempt to increase the software publishing revenue by being able to license third-party games for use on the console. And by doing this, it would block third-party games that weren't licensed and perhaps not of a higher quality. One of the other sacrifices, though, that was made in the design was the idea and bad decision to not use the Pokey chip. Well, the Pokey chip was an audio chip that could be used to enhance the sound on the console. But it was decided that they wouldn't do that. However, they would provide for the ability for developers to add the Pokey chip to their cartridges. Now, when we talk about the 7800 Plus, the first suggestion I would tell you is get yourself a copy of Pole Position 2. Pole Position 2 was the pack-in cartridge for the original Atari 7800 Pro system. And guess what? It's actually a pretty good game, and it's rather cheap. Now, one of the other things you will find about the Atari 7800 Pro system was the fact that they had what was called a super cartridge. Yes, sir. That's right, the super game cartridges. This is Desert Falcon. Used to be called Nile Flyer. It was developed by GCC for the 7800, and it is a super game cartridge, which meant that it was either a higher quality game or a computer conversion, and it was supposed to call your attention to the fact that the quality of the game was supposed to be that of a higher level than a typical 7800 game. Now, a typical 7800 game, however, isn't going to be that great. Why is that? Well, the graphics just aren't as good as the NES, which is what I have found to be an interesting problem for the 7800. However, with only 60 cartridges in its library, and only recently has the information about the 7800 been propagated into the public, which led to the development of the A7800 emulator, which also has started a big revolution of development of 7800 titles for the console. Now, I think that's a pretty cool thing. Now, there are some good games on the 7800, make no mistake about that. But a lot of them, especially the older 7800 games that you, like me, might be interested in exploring, aren't exactly the cheapest games out there. How expensive are they? Well, that is a big topic for discussion. 7800 games and some of the games that came out at the end of the console's life cycle are for sure more rare. Now, that has led to some pricing of these cartridges that are north of $250. I even saw one that was $300. Now, I do think that this is a problem for the 7800. So the original 7800 games, a lot of them are going to be out of the budget of the normal player. Now, Atari has tried to start to address some of this by doing some re-releases of, for instance, Fatal Run, which is one that's pretty expensive, and Dark Chamber, which is another one that's pretty expensive. And they plan on doing more of these. In addition, to help support the console, they're going to start releasing new games like Tiger Healy for the 7800 and games that you probably have never seen because they were only released on Atari Age. But you know, another one of the tips that I can tell you is that the Pro Line controller, which was originally came with the original 7800, which is compatible with the 7800 Plus, is an interesting option. It's a very durable controller. I haven't really found any issues with it, but you know what? You get this weird hand fatigue on the way that the controller is being held in your hand. Now, I've noticed that it is, on some games, like Tiger Healy, a little bit better, and definitely better than the gamepad. But then we're back to a cord again, and I can't say that I'm really happy with the gamepad either, as I pointed out before. Now, I do think that that leads to some dissatisfaction with playing some of the games. So I would encourage you to avail yourself of a lot of the 7800 options there are to use a compatible controller with the system. Now, what do I think about more releases of more new games for the 7800? Look, I think that Atari CEO is right about one thing. It's interesting from a nostalgia point of view, and it's interesting from an educational point of view, also from a preservation point of view. But I gotta be honest with you, with the cost of some of these cartridges from the old releases, although they've held up and they still work if you clean the connectors, the cost just isn't there. So even if Atari re-releases them at $30, $35 a piece, I'm trying hard to understand how that is going to work in an economy right now that is as tight as it is. So I gotta wonder, I suppose $35 for the new games, but some of the re-releases I do think are gonna have to be priced lower. But I do think that in order for the console to continue to be successful, Atari is gonna have to keep bringing new things to the table. And with partners like PlayOn bringing Tiger Healy, boy, you know, that's pretty awesome. If you can do more new games like that, that start to push what the 7800 can do, that's a pretty interesting thing. And I think that that's something that a lot of people would be interested in. The problem is with a lot of these older games, they never push the hardware to the limit because it really wasn't around long enough. So now, and only now, with newer programming techniques, we're able to see people really create some amazing things with the Atari 7800. Problem is, some of the older things that you'd like to check out are just too expensive, and I just don't know that a lot of people will pay $300 for a game that's, you know, all these years old, and it just, you know, you might want to run it in emulation or get it another way. But if you want to play something that's a lot closer to the original, this is that. It's just expensive. My name is Marbs. Now you hit that subscribe button for me. We'll see you in the next one.